Hi, welcome to my kitchen in Landers. For all my friends and family who keep asking for directions on how to make sourdough or my recipe, I thought since we're all trapped at home during this pandemic, why not make a little video? I learned how to make sourdough because of Philip and Scott. I have a severe wheat allergy, and they kept sending me articles showing me how fermenting dough would actually change the structure of the protein, and that I could probably eat it, and they were right. So for almost a year they made me a loaf every Sunday, which was really lovely, but then sort of passed on the torch and taught a few of us. So here is basically their recipe, but with twists that I've learned along the way. There are certain things you need, but you know, they can be modified, and I know we don't have access to everything right now, but if you don't have a starter, you know, we can arrange to do a drive-by or something if you need. So I'm just going to post the recipe right here, although I'm going to be stepping you through it, but you can go back to this if you need. Let's start with starter. I find the easiest jars to use are these gelato, the Talenti gelato jars, besides the fact that you get to enjoy them. But it's good to be in plastic because it needs, your starter kind of needs air, and plastic is porous. You can use a glass jar, but don't tighten the lid. I keep two starters going. The other glass jar I use, I have a rye starter always going, and it's a Weck jar, which you can get on Amazon. I remove there's a rubber ring and the metal clasps, and I just put this shower cap on top. So those are the two I always have going. I mostly just use a white flour one for when I'm making pizza, and I use the rye flour when I'm doing bread because it's really active. For some reason starter likes rye flour. So all we're gonna do is every time you feed it, I mean the goal is that you're feeding it after every time you've started a loaf, but if not, just keep a quarter cup of starter in, and then we're going to use, now I only use King Arthur bread flour because it has a high protein count. It does better with bread, but you can use all-purpose flour too. I just actually don't love doing that. So to a quarter cup starter, we're going to add a half cup dry measure flour. And then just a tad over a quarter cup water. And then just mix it up. Then you're going to want to let it come to room temperature, and it's going to double. And after it doubles, you could do one of two things. Put it in the fridge and use it up to a week later. Or once it doubles, you can bake bread. I'm not really consistent about how I do it. Sometimes when you take it out of the refrigerator, usually I try to bake on Sundays, I'll pull it out and I'll let it come to room temperature. It'll double again, and then I can use it straight there. Sometimes if it's not seeming active enough, you're going to want to refeed it and then wait till it comes to room temperature. Okay, so we're going to mix our first dough. So I'm going to use the rye starter, which you can see is doubled from when I first started. And like I said, the rye for some reason is a lot more stiff than using the bread flour. So I'm going to put in a half cup of starter into the bowl. So now what I'm going to do first, it's called, well, a more traditional autolyse is where you just put the flour and water and let it sit for 45 minutes so that it absorbs the water and strengthens the gluten structure. But I do a thing that's more, I guess, called the ferment-lyse, but which is I put the starter, flour, and water and let it sit for 45 minutes. We do not put the salt yet because that'll stop or slow down the gluten production. So let's get, so we have our our half cup of starter, just over a cup and a quarter of filtered water. I forgot to mention that when I was talking about the starter. You can't use tap water because of the chlorine, and that kills our bacteria, which is, so I'm just going to sort of mix the starter and the water together, and then we're going to put in a cup and a third, 3 1/4 cups, flour. Quarter. 1, 2, 3. Now I know not everyone has a KitchenAid mixer or a stand mixer. A lot of people do it by hand. I find, because I bake every week and it's become this routine, I find using a stand mixer really easy. So I'm going to just mix this all together and kind of just get it to come together so it's sort of solid. I'm going to put, again, a shower cap. Okay, so we've had this doing the Autolyse or Ferment-Lyse for about a half an hour, 45 minutes. It looks kind of like a sticky mess. But now we're going to add the salt. Again, the salt will stop it from, the gluten from producing too fast, so it sort of retards the process. So a teaspoon of salt. Sometimes you might need a teeny bit of water also, but again, when I use the rye, it seems to be pretty sticky. Now I'm going to turn the mixer on sort of highish speed now. When we did our first mixing, it was on the low side, but we sort of want to just get it going. Incorporating the salt. I'd usually probably do it a little longer, but I figure you don't need to hear that. So get it off there. Just going to sort of get it into like a ball. Again, it's a little sticky, so I'm going to dust my hands with the rice flour. Okay, that's much better. So just sort of smooth it out in a ball. Just going to set there, cover with the shower cap, and we're going to leave that for 10 to 12 hours. Okay, so we've finished our first rise. This has been rising for about 10 hours, sitting here on the counter. The room should be about 70 or 80 degrees. If it's too cold, it'll take too long. Too warm, it'll rise too fast. So I love this silicone bread little scraper. I'm going to just shoot a little bit of olive oil on it so it doesn't stick. So I'm going to get it out of the bowl. Just sort of pushing along the sides just so that this batch is not sticky for some reason. Okay, so this is a Banneton. I just started using this. It's lined with cloth. You can get them super cheap on Amazon. Just see, it's a little basket. I used to use just a large mixing bowl, glass, and I'd spray it with olive oil and dust it with rice flour so that it wouldn't stick for our second rise that we're going to do in the refrigerator. But I just started using this and I love it a lot more. So I'm just going to dust it with a little more. When you first get it, you sort of just mist it with water and then kind of season it with rice flour. Look at this others are. The dough should have doubled in size, so we're just going to sort of sticky. It's important to use rice flour because, you know, if like myself you're allergic to wheat, you only want to use the dough that's fermented. So I'm just going to sort of get it into a ball and put it in our Benetton. Again, cover it with shower cap and put it in the refrigerator. So we're going to put this in overnight in the refrigerator. So at least a 12-hour retarded rise in the refrigerator. Okay, so it's the next morning. We've been doing our sourdough for 24 hours. Excuse the PJs, but this is how it really happens. So I've preset the oven to 500 degrees. With sourdough, you really want to cook high temps. So I use a Dutch oven, a Le Creuset. They sell ones for about $50–40 at Marshall's, since we're in the desert. Just make sure it doesn't have a plastic lid and it's high temp rated. This is really the key to sourdough baking because it creates the steam inside that helps your rise. I also just started, I have a pizza stone that I just leave in there. It kind of helps get from the bottom getting too burned and crusty. You also need some really long gloves. Trust me, I have lots of burns on my arms. Okay. So we have our Benetton, we have our risen dough. This was just taken straight out of the refrigerator. I'm going to dust the top with rice flour. This is to help it keep from sticking. Some people use parchment. I don't. I just use the rice flour. Okay, so now the tricky part is not burning yourself, putting it obviously into the Dutch oven. I just sort of flip it over and gently place it. Now we're going to cover, so it goes 20 minutes covered in a 500 degree oven. Our bread has been in for 20 minutes. We're going to reduce the temperature to 475. Put on my trusty gloves again, and we're going to remove the lid. I'm going to pull it out. You don't need to, but I just want to show it to you. So see how much oven spring we got because of the Dutch oven and the steam it produces with the lid on. So now it's going to go into here for 15 minutes uncovered. Okay, so our timer's gone off. We're going to take bread out of the oven. Okay, here it is. You can see benefits of the high heat and the lid off, how it's beautifully caramelized. Again, be really careful taking it out. I let it rest on the, I just have this little oven rack, but you know, you don't really need to do that, but that's just what I do. And as tempting as it is to want to eat fresh warm bread, you have to let it set for a couple hours because the insides will sort of compress and we want it to be light and airy. The other thing I didn't mention, do you see how I sort of have that, we call it an ear, where it sticks up? Some people use a razor blade to score that just as they put it, or placing it from their Benetton into the, I like to see the mystery of what actually happens on its own. So hopefully that was informative. I feel a little silly, but everybody keeps asking, and happy baking.